the whole reason I moved away from the Seattle area is because I hate being cold and wet all of the time. But I
You
also
prefer
was
you prefer hot and wet?
I prefer hot and dry. That's my
Oh,
preference. I know. I'm so
that's
sorry.
unfortunate for Brian. Okay. Hey, adventurers! Welcome to Let's Just Go podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Kayla, and today we are going to Alaska. Both
Ooh.
both Chris and I have in the last, I want to say 2 years. We were actually just talking about this. I had to look up when I went. We've both gone to Alaska. I went on a cruise, and Chris has actually done a land tour.
I have, and was Alaska on your bucket list? I mean, was it a?
No.
Well, you're also from Washington,
Right. Yeah. I feel like Alaska in my head has always just been like Seattle North.
right? And for me, it was like 87 hours away from. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really right from the Philly area. It's closer to go to Iceland or London, honestly,
Yeah, probably.
than it is to go to Alaska. So
Yeah.
for me, it was absolutely like this experience that I really wanted to do, and I'm very glad I got to do it.
Yeah, I definitely had an amazing experience. Like I'm really glad I did it and I want to go back. I went with my mom and I told my boyfriend that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you would love it." He's also from the Seattle area, like born and raised. I'm like, "You would think it's so great." But he doesn't seem as like gung ho about going as which makes like I wasn't super excited. I got a good deal on my cruise and that's why I went because it was still in that time frame where like people weren't really cruising, ships weren't full, they were doing anything they could to get you to get on a ship. And I was like, well, my mom lives in the Puget Sound area, so I can just fly home, see her, and go on a cruise. That's what we did.
Right. And most Alaskan cruises leave from either Seattle or Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, they're generally pretty easy to get to. The interesting thing about the cruising aspect, though, it has a season, right? And so
Yeah.
it's late April, really May through September, and that's really due to weather, right?
Yeah, the weather can be temperamental. I mean, the weather in the Seattle area is also that way during the summer. You can get some really rainy days. You can get some beautiful, like 90-degree days. Um, but we went at the end of July and we actually had rain for most of our trip. So it really, it, you have to temper your expectations. You're not going to get a pool day, more than likely. You're going to have to be bundled up. I had my winter coat, I had my winter gloves. I bought a hat. Like I was bundled one of the days that we were at sea. So you just have to like be aware of that when you plan this trip, even though it's summertime.
Right. And you're in the United States, and it's summertime, and you're bundled, right? Which
Yeah.
is crazy, a
Mhm.
crazy thought. But the I went in September, and they were telling us that they haven't had, it was perfect weather. Honestly, we were in winter coats when we were out on doing out on boats, but for the most part, it was warm enough to be peeling off. It was kind of like skiing when you're like, okay, I'm bundled to start, but I'm getting hot. I'm like trekking through, and that's sort of what was happening, which was kind of nice. I was worried about the weather because me and cold weather don't really go together. I have a weird skin condition thing, and no one needs to any more details on. And uh, so I was worried, but it worked out perfectly, perfectly. So when you sailed, you did. I think the other piece is, let's just talk about Alaska for a minute, right? It's a huge, huge,
Huge.
huge, huge.
Huge. I live in Texas currently, and people like to talk about how Texas is so big. And I want to say that Texas fits like a couple of times in Alaska.
Yeah.
if you were to
But
overlap them.
the population is not very large, right? And so
Yeah.
most of the population also living in the Anchorage area, right, which
Mhm.
is not something you get to when you
No.
usually when you do a cruise, right? So
Yeah.
it was an interesting, and I think I'm gonna. This is not an exact fact, but I think it was like 1 in 11 people own a seaplane in
Oh,
Alaska because there's so
interesting.
few. There's so few roadways and highways. Not that
Mhm.
it's like this desolate place, but if you
Right.
really need to get places fast that are kind of far, it's not hopping in a car, right? Because
Right.
that may take twice as long than flying. So,
Yeah.
wrapping my head around that aspect too. But it was just, a really interesting experience in terms of culture and
Mhm.
geography
Yeah.
to see that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, all
Yeah.
right, but you did the southeastern cruise, right? Which is
Yeah.
also part, right? Because people in Anchorage are like, oh, you should never cruise, right? I feel like there's like this ongoing internal battle between the residents of Alaska, and it is when you cruise, you see the southeastern part, which is such a very small percentage of the state.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, and let's be honest, they're very touristy, right? I mean,
Yes.
all of
Yeah.
those places. So, what was your
Yeah.
favorite port stop?
Oh gosh. Honestly, like, I liked all of them for different reasons. So we went to Juneau, Ketchikan, and Skagway. Juneau was the most like what you expect when you're in a small city slash large town. It wasn't super kitschy, where the other two were very much like, welcome to our little touristy town that you can come visit. Um, yeah, I really liked, I would say probably I actually liked Ketchikan and Skagway more than Juneau because of the fact that they were like super walkable. Like you could just get off the ship and walk and be in town, where Juneau has a lot more vehicles and has like it's a lot more spread out than the other two are. Um, but yeah, they were all fun in like different ways. Juneau was also where we went. Like we had our biggest excursion that day. We went and spent like the day at a dog training camp for sled dogs, like to like hold puppies and stuff. So we didn't get to explore as much as we did in the other two places.
Because you picked that as your excursion, so it took up the
Yeah.
whole. What was the one where you got stuck on a train because a boulder fell? It's
Yeah.
shitty.
Yeah, that was, oh my gosh, I have to look at my notes. I can't ever remember which one is Skagway and which one is Ketchikan. Okay, so Skagway is where that happened. So that was the White Pass Railway, which actually takes you into Canada, because that's the other thing is that when you cruise Alaska, you're really just cruising the westernmost part of Canada. It's just that like Alaska happens to like trickle down onto the western part of BC. So you get on the train, and it's like a very old train that actually has been around. I'm not good at like history and remembering facts, and it's been a while since this trip. But they blew out the mountain essentially to build this railway during the like gold era, I think is when it was. Um, so you're supposed to be able to go up to the top of a mountain. The train turns around and then comes back down. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that you got to the top, your seats flipped, and then you went back down so that your seats would flip so you were always facing forward. So we were the first train of the day, or maybe not the first train, but we were like early in the morning, and we got up to the top of the mountain, not quite to where we turned around, and they said, "Ooh, we are so sorry guys. We actually can't continue. There's a giant boulder on the tracks." And they had teams try to move it, and they were like, "We actually have to send up another train with equipment to move the boulder." And because it's a single track, our train had to like pull off to the side at one point to let the train that had the equipment pass us. So we ended up actually getting a full refund, even though we did like, I would say that we did whatever the old version of this was. Like, yeah, we didn't get to the very top and turn around, but we made it a solid like 75% of the way. But they still refunded us and we still had a great time. They did get the boulder moved, and people later in the day were able to go all the way up to the top, but we were not so lucky.
I think that's a really good point, though, because you should, especially in these more adventurous type excursions, really be booking these types of things through the cruise line.
Yeah.
Because if you were stuck on a mountain and you didn't book that through a cruise line, that cruise ship would have left without you, right? But
Yeah.
since you booked it through the cruise line that you were on, you they would have waited, right? They would have
Yeah.
made accommodations, or at least got, they would have taken care of you. So I think that's a good side note point there that people just need to be aware of, because
Yeah.
that would have sucked if you were just stuck on a mountain and fucking wherever you were, middle of nowhere.
Yeah. It was so pretty though. It was an absolutely beautiful trip. And there was like a narrator essentially on the train, like giving you the history of the area and all of that. And they would be like, okay, in about a minute on the right hand side, you're gonna see a waterfall. And like they'd forewarn you so you could like be ready to like look outside and see the beautiful thing. There's also along the path, there's just a random like train car on the side of the railway. And it's literally like a vacation rental. Like, I can't remember who they said, like, if it's, like, state-owned
No,
or something, but
I don't want to do that.
you can just stay in a little train car in the middle of nowhere on the side of the train tracks.
That sounds terrifying. My first question is, what happens if you need medical attention?
I mean, you hope for the best. They'll probably
Yeah,
flight you out.
it's the end of the road, literally. The end of
Literally.
Oh boy. Yeah, well, make sure you have travel insurance then, I think
That's
is
that's true. Yeah.
the whole point there. So on the cruise though, I mean, it's such a different way of cruising, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like a Caribbean cruise where you're like, looking for the sunsets, and the ports are not as important possibly on a Caribbean cruise, right? But here you're
Yeah.
getting off.
Mhm.
The ports.
It's a very port heavy. I mean, I would honestly compare it to like sailing Europe, which I've also done, and how close you are to land most of the time. So I always say that I think Alaska is a great like first cruise for people who aren't really sure. Granted, it's usually a 7-day cruise, and that can be a lot if somebody doesn't enjoy it. But you are, I wouldn't say landlocked, but like you've got land on both sides of you for like a good portion, because you're like going through like islands and things. And if not on both sides of you, then it's at the very least you can see the land as you're sailing, which is honestly part of the appeal. A lot of people bring binoculars. You can see bears and things. It's fun to see what you can spot out in the trees. And there's also, again, I love a good waterfall, and there were so many good waterfalls along the cruise.
The No, I think that's a good point. I mean, they are often 7
Yeah.
days. Not every Alaskan cruise is round trip though either, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely cruise lines that have, and really any of the major ones have one-way cruises, right?
Yeah.
So they'll start all the way south, in Vancouver, and then end it in Seward often, like
Mhm.
right, um, which is about 2 hours south of Anchorage
Mhm.
ish. 2 3 hours. I forget how long our train ride was
It's
from
far.
Anchorage to Seward. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is far, but um, what was your least favorite part of the Alaskan cruise?
That's such a good question. Probably just being cold and wet. I'm not a fan of cold weather, as you are well aware. That's why I've lived in the South for as long as I have. Um, I didn't love the fact that it rained the whole like most of the trip, because the whole reason I moved away from the Seattle area is because I hate being cold and wet all of the time. Um, but I
You
also
prefer
was
you prefer hot and wet?
I prefer hot and dry. That's my
Oh,
preference. I know, I'm
that's
so sorry.
unfortunate for Brian. Okay.
Um, I really tried to like embrace it though. Like I when I went on this cruise, I was in sort of like a vlogging phase that never took off. Like I was recording videos and being like, I'm going to be a YouTube star. And then that
Oh,
didn't happen. But I like definitely have videos of me and my mom just like walking in the rain back to the ship because we had, I mean, like that's the only way to get back to the ship is walking down this very long port to get to eventually the ship we need to get on. So I didn't love that.
no, and that's rough because it is for many many people. Alaska is a bucket list, once in a lifetime
Yeah.
type, and you have to almost plan that sometimes the weather's just not going to work out and
Hmm.
embrace it, not let it ruin your trip. Because yeah, that does make it shitty.
Yeah.
Uh, but you got to hold puppies.
But I got to hold puppies. Those puppies, oh my gosh. I this is this is the problem with me. So I know that last week we were talking to
So
Jasmine.
this we don't.
We don't have time
Yeah,
for that. Yeah, I'm
we
so
don't.
sorry.
We don't. Yeah.
So last week Jasmine was talking about her competitive spirit and how
Hmm.
when she runs, she suddenly sees someone that she thinks she can beat and she has to like race them in her mind. So that was me seeing the people who actually do the sledding, like that take these dogs on these like cross Alaska trips. And I'm like, oh, I could do that. No, I couldn't. I could never. But I'm delirious. I'm delusional enough to be like, I could totally do that. No problem. I can definitely stand for 8 to 12 hours a day on the back of a sled.
No,
No,
I don't.
I could
I don't
not.
want to do that. Yeah, I
No.
don't really want to be. I don't want to do that. I don't want to fly in a small little baby plane. I
No.
don't want to
No.
ride on the back of a dog sled for longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so that's not
Yeah.
really mine. What other excursions did you do?
So we did the train, we did the seeing the puppies, and then the other excursion that we did was actually not, so those were both through our cruise that we booked those excursions. And then our third excursion, we did a crab feast. So if we had booked through the ship, we would have had to go on like a crabbing expedition, like what is that show called? Like World's Most Dangerous Catch or something like Deadliest Catch, whatever that
Deadly.
show's called. Yeah.
Yep.
And my mom does not do boats. She can handle a ship. She loves a cruise, but a small boat is not for her. And also, I don't give me the crab. I don't need to see the crab alive. I don't need you to show me how you catch them. Just give me the dead one in a on a plate and let me eat it. That's all I want. And give me all the butter.
All
That's
the
all I
butter.
need. That's all I
Oh,
need.
I need Old Bay, but yes, yeah,
Old Bay. Yeah, that's a very East Coast thing to say.
yeah.
It's okay.
Uh,
The look on
yeah.
your face, you don't know how to respond to
I'm
that.
trying not to be. I'm not. I'm trying to be nice today.
I really
So
appreciate that. I know how hard that
don't.
is for you.
It's really hard for me to not say go fuck yourself.
I've said that
Yeah.
so much this week in general. Wow.
Well, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
good week to tell people to fuck off. Um, so do you feel like the cruise allowed you? So there were days too. I mean, you have sea days, right? But
Yeah.
you're also looking at, they may be
Glaciers.
close to glaciers and things,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
does everyone actually know what a glacier is?
Probably not. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't fully comprehend what a glacier is. I do understand that it's a giant sheet of ice and that it's constantly moving because actually one of our servers, so we run Disney Cruise Line, and there is an adults only restaurant on Disney Cruise Line called Palo. And we were dining there, and our server was saying that he's been doing Alaskan cruises for, I want to say, like close to a decade. And he showed us a picture of, I think it was Dawes Glacier is where the ship normally goes. Um, he shows a picture of Dawes Glacier the first year that he had been sailing, and then what it looked like this year, or when I sailed 2 years ago. Uh, and that glacier had shrunk so much. Um, Thank you so much, global warming. The climate
Mhm.
crisis is real, and I think that it is most prevalent in some place like Alaska. Like you can really tell.
That is, yes, right. And so, well, one, so my first question, 2 points that you hit on there. I think my first question was, do you know what a glacier is? And yes, but I can't fully wrap my head around how a chunk, because I'm like, is it a iceberg? No,
Right. No.
right. It's not, and it's constantly moving, which is part of why the calving, right, like where the chunks
Mm-hmm.
break off and drop into the ocean. That's called calving, if you're unfamiliar. But the because it's and then that thundering sound is that it's moving, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, what the hell? How's this happening?
Yeah.
How's it happening? But um, on my land tour, we went and looked at part of it was exploring Exit Glacier, right? I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of glaciers in the state of California, of the state of
Well, I think
um,
California, they got flooding to
Alaska.
worry about right now,
Yeah,
not
definitely
glaciers.
not California.
Uh,
But hundreds of glaciers. But that was really interesting because as you drive up to like the main entrance, they have markers down the main road that say like,
um,
in 1857 it was here, and then and then it starts getting faster, right? Like
mm-hmm.
the decline of that glacier starts getting much quicker in the last 50 years or so. So yeah, I
Wow.
mean it is interesting to be standing somewhere, see something miles and miles away, and knowing that the ice at one point was covering that area that you're standing. So
That's so cool. I mean, like
yeah,
that's really cool that they have it like marked. It really is shitty that we humans are just ruining this entire planet. But it's cool. I mean, honestly, I feel like glaciers are sort of like how they say visit Venice before it's underwater. Visit Alaska before the glaciers are gone, before they've
yeah,
completely melted. I feel like that's a thing that's unfortunately going to
for
happen.
sure. Um,
Yeah.
well, anything else about your cruise though? That
I mean, it was just like it was a really fun time. One thing that I didn't realize is that most of the like staff in specifically in Ketchikan and Skagway, I don't know so much about Juneau, um, actually live in the lower 48 and they specifically come up to Alaska for the summertime to work. Some will actually take a ferry from Seattle with their car. It's very, very expensive. But it's so that they can have their vehicle because Ketchikan and Skagway are both very far removed from civilization. Like you're going through a huge national like forest area to get to civilization from those places. So if they don't come with their car, they're not going to have a car, basically. So just to give you an idea of how remote all of Alaska is, like, yeah, cruising, Native Alaskans might not love the idea of it, but there's really not, in my opinion, a better way to get to those more southern places.
yeah, no, I'm right. That's what you have to take the cruise, and that's on my
Yeah.
list. I do want to take an Alaskan cruise, but in doing the land tour was interesting because you're not cruising, right? And you fly
Right.
into Anchorage, which is approximately 10 years away from anything.
Yeah.
It was so it started off flying from Philly to Dallas, right? So we were down by you,
Backwards. Yeah.
and then Dallas to Anchorage, right?
How
How
long
many
is that
hours?
flight? I'm going to guess
Seven,
like 10.
7 fucking hours.
Oh,
It was
gosh.
longer to go from Dallas to Anchorage than it was to fly from Philadelphia to Los Angeles.
Man.
Um, Well, just to give you a point, so on my return, it was Anchorage to Seattle, which was a
Hmm.
3.5 hour flight,
Yeah.
right? Like when you look at a map, you're like, it can't be that far. There's no way. And you're like, holy shit, 3.5 fucking hours.
So to
So,
put that in perspective for you, Chris, as someone who has flown out of Seattle my whole life, it takes 2.5 to get to LAX. So it's an extra hour further to get to Anchorage from Seattle
right,
than it is to
right.
get to LA.
And it's about 3 hours from Philly to Miami, right? So
Yeah.
I could have flown, it's
You can go a
mind
lot of
boggling.
places in that
I
amount of
could have
time.
flown to Miami and back to Philly in less time than it would have taken.
to get to
from
Anchorage from
Dallas
Dallas.
to Anchorage. Yeah, it was wild.
But it
And
was a
it,
nonstop from Dallas?
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Interesting. I didn't expect that.
There are nonstop flights in like July, June, July, August, I think,
Yeah.
from like Newark. Like there's
Oh,
some, or
yeah.
like JFK, like so if you're trying to hit it to Anchorage.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was, man, that was a rough flight for my ADHD. I,
I believe it.
but I thought Anchorage was interesting, right? Because it's a small city. It's a big city
Mhm.
for them, but it's a small city.
Yeah.
No one lives there. I was like, oh shit, I forgot deodorant. Where can I go? They're like, well, there's like a Walgreens and CVS, but it's like 4 miles outside of the city. And I'm like, what? And because I'm used to Northeast cities where you're like, but no one lives
Yeah.
in Anchorage, right? In the actual downtown section of Anchorage, no one
Right.
lives there. It's really just for work, but it's right on the water. It's beautiful. Um, except like the mud flats that are there. We're taking a walk one day because we got in early before anything started. And we're taking a walk in this nice couple stops. Like, yeah, you see the mud flats? We're like, yeah, yeah. They're like, so many, don't walk on that if you're not from around here. I'm like, what? What? They're like, well, it's quicksand and you'll die. And
Oh
I was like,
my
what?
god.
They're like telling us a story. They're like, yes, this woman, she went out there and she started sinking and they can't save you. So they just throw out a tube and then you die eventually. Like, well, I'm like,
Oh
why do they
my
give her a tube?
god.
The tube's not going to just prolong. Like, hey, it's like, what the hell? So things that you don't need to worry about in your current life. But the land tour was really interesting. We did some glacier walks, right? I mean, again, having to drive maybe like an hour and a half outside of, but just the landscape in general, right, is
Yeah.
so incredible. And then one day we took the Alaska Railroad, which I think celebrated its 100th year this year,
Oh,
or
cool.
last year in 2023. Um, and very cool, right? Glass ceilings, so you can sit
Ooh.
and watch. You can go outside if you want, and in some of the decks and see and watch things, right? And so the landscape is breathtaking, right? And you
It
can't
really
describe
is.
it unless you're in it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we
The
took like a
mountains are
3 hour.
so tall. That's the thing. Like, again, being
Yeah.
from the Pacific Northwest and like we've got mountains all around us, we've got mountain ranges running through the state, but being in Alaska and standing at the foot of a mountain and just seeing how high that fucker is.
Hmm.
It really is. It's indescribable.
We went to like a fancy-ish resort, and I would say it's a ski lodge resort area outside of Anchorage, and we took the um, tram car, the
Oh, what are
gondola,
those
the
called?
gondola,
Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah.
gondolas up the mountain, and we went above the clouds. It was that day. It was crazy,
I think you
and
sent
then
me those videos.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
was it was really awesome, but it is crazy to be like, first of all, just this little baby wire is holding me up. And that is the most terrifying thing. So we toured there. There are lots of breweries, lots of awesome
So
breweries.
many. Oh,
What did we
love
hit
it.
up? The 49th State Brewery. That's um,
Mhm.
awesome. And then, but the Alaska Railroad was really pretty cool. And then we
Yeah.
ended in Seward,
Mhm.
which is where we talked about some of the cruises. And then there were cruise ships actually in port at the time, but everything you would picture in like a small town Hallmark movie, right? Is what that looked like and felt like, and really awesome. But we got on a boat, a smaller like speedboat of sorts, right? And
Yeah.
we went out in the Kenai Fjord National Park,
Cool.
and we saw so much wildlife, from seals to sea lions to bald eagles. We saw a beluga whale, which unfortunately was probably not well because he
As
was
you
by
say,
himself.
lost? Yeah.
Yeah, his little white head bobbing around.
Oh.
We saw a pod of orcas, killer whales, right? I mean, just again, things that you never think you would ever see, right? And
Yeah.
just and there the fjords, right? At first of all, I was like, "What's a fjord?" And what do you
Mhm.
think of when you hear the word fjord? What country?
Oh, Iceland.
Yeah, Norway,
Oh,
Iceland, right?
Norway, you're
But
right, yeah. The
that's what,
Nordic countries.
yeah, Nordic countries, which Alaska essentially, right? I mean, and I thought that to myself. I just remember thinking, people travel to other countries to see what I'm
Mhm.
seeing right now, right? And in many
Yeah.
cases, if you didn't know the temperature, you would have thought it was Tahiti too, like the way that the rock features were, and
Mhm.
very awesome kind of experience. And well, it's in our country,
Yeah.
right?
I
It's
mean,
in
it's just as far away as a foreign country, but
it might have well been, right? I could see Russia. No, uh,
depending on where you were, you could have.
you might have, um, but that was that was pretty amazing. Just
Yeah.
thinking, this is people's lives, right? I mean, this is
Mhm.
where they live in the United States of America, and
Yeah.
nowhere else can you really get that experience.
Yeah. I have a couple friends that live in Alaska because it's not that far from Seattle in the grand scheme of things. But most of them live in Fairbanks, which I believe is even further north than
It is
Anchorage.
further north. Yep.
Yeah, I have a friend who was actually there for work last week. So first, like last week of January slash first week of February, and it was -40. And she
No.
had an electric car that she couldn't turn off because if she turned it off, she couldn't turn it back on. Like that's how cold it was.
Yeah.
So
No. I don't ever want to live anywhere that's happening ever.
no,
Actually.
no. Yeah, it definitely sounded absolutely awful. I think that Alaska in the summertime sounds wonderful. I think Alaska in the winter sounds like my actual worst nightmare.
Mine too. And
Yeah.
but that's the cool part about the land tours is that the cruise season. We talked about the cruise season already. The land tours can go year round, right? And they
Yeah.
definitely have options where you can go and do like deep in the winter, and for the people who love snow and want to see the
Mhm.
northern lights, and
Yes.
right. I mean, so from Anchorage you can see Denali, which is awesome. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so huge. It's not close at all, but they have land tours that go out to Denali, and then you have a much better chance of seeing northern lights there,
Mhm.
which was so fun because you're like every Alaskan in Anchorage was like, oh, well, you go to this app and you track this, and like you could everybody there like that's part of their daily like tracking, right? Like you check the weather, they check the weather, and whether or not they're going to be able to see northern lights, which is wild to me, right? Because again, it's so out of our normal day to day.
Yeah.
So um, didn't see Northern Lights, so I was a little bit disappointed because I'm like, I'm so close, and I might
But
not
you
ever
were
be here.
like in the off season of Northern Lights, weren't you?
Yeah, but they were so the metrics, like the apps were showing that it was like highly likely to see them. I don't know
Oh.
if Anchorage is a little too, but when I woke up in the middle of the night, my ass walked to that window, and I was like, looking around for the Northern Lights. It's like so. The people we were traveling with, some people did the land tour. I did. Others did the land tour that went north to Denali, and that's where they were able to see the northern lights.
Oh. So you just
Yeah,
need to be a little further north.
correct.
Damn.
So I know,
You just
I
have to
know.
go
It's like,
back now.
and maybe
The
I
only
will.
choice you have. I think
I'll
that
have.
a land tour sounds like a ton of fun. Like, I think cruising is great. I don't know that I need to go back to like, I feel like the ports that I visited on my cruise are kind of a one and done. Like, it would be fun to go back there, but I've seen what there is to see, for the most part. Um, but again, having friends that live in Alaska and they love it and they've been there for years, they do make it seem really appealing, minus the fact that it's mostly chain restaurants and like because all everything has to be like flown in, you're not getting like really anything fresh. My friend that was recently there was also saying that the coffee is awful, and as someone from the Seattle area, awful coffee just isn't going to work for me.
I think what I was, and I guess I wasn't putting like the cost of living obviously is not really any different than
Yeah.
living in the north, right? Like I mean, because of exactly that, they have to fly things in, right? And so your um, cost is not any better than
Yeah.
anywhere else. So that was interesting. But I do think the land tour option gives you more. flexibility, right? Like
Mhm.
we hiked a glacier, right? I mean, we rode the train. Um, we didn't do the dog sledding. That was the one thing I didn't do, which I would have loved to have done. We were on an abbreviated land tour,
Yeah.
and I did it in a group. Right, we did it with like a guided group. So there's groups of up to 12 people that go and do these tours together as
Yeah.
an option. Which again, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's for me traveling with randos. But usually it's fine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they do a nice job at engaging, and then it becomes like a little retreat. Like you meet these
Mhm.
people that are experiencing all of these amazing things with you at the same time, and so it's just
Yeah.
it's pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
And then the advantage of land is that you have flexibility of right. The cruises are you're
Yeah.
locked into that itinerary, and that's
Yeah.
that.
One really hard thing that we didn't run into, is that there are a lot of excursions on cruises in Alaska that can be canceled very easily. So, a lot of people will pay the hundreds and hundreds of dollars to take a helicopter out into the snow to to see dogs, right? So they're doing like a more authentic sled dog experience where they're getting on a sled with the
Oh,
dogs in the snow, and they took the helicopter to get there. For us, our dog sledding excursion was essentially, they call it like a summer camp for the dogs, and it felt like where I went to summer camp growing up. Like we were just like in the middle of the woods, lots of trees. There's, like a ton of dogs. They've got their little sledding. Like it wasn't an actual sled, it was like a little seat that it fit four people in it, and we sat seat belted in, and the dogs ran us around a track. But if you want to take the helicopter to go have the more authentic experience, first of all, you're paying like $600 a person for it, which is, I get it's
yeah.
a once in a lifetime opportunity. Okay, that's great. But if it's too windy, if there's not enough visibility, like there's so many factors at play that can have you end up with your helicopter tours canceled. And I think that most of the helicopter tours on our trip ended up being canceled because of the weather. So
Mm,
you just have to keep that in mind. If, again, tempering expectations, if that is I have to do this thing, it's the only thing that I want to do, maybe look into doing it by land so that you're in a place for longer and have a better opportunity to be able to do the thing you want to do.
I do think you bring up a good point because we often talk about cost because I think people want to know what the hell does this shit cost, right?
Yeah.
And a cruise is not the cruise itself, depending on the cruise line, may show in it as affordable.
Yeah.
I'll say, right, generally affordable, right? Like so, for a family of four, you may get it for $4,000 or $5,000, but you, as Kayla just pointed out, you're going to get slammed on the excursion costs because
Yeah.
there are not many that aren't going to be $1,000 a pop for a family of
Mhm.
four to do. Um,
Yeah.
and that so I think that part's important to think about. The land tour I did was 6 days, and it's roughly about $2,800. Now that doesn't include a lot of the food, right? But
Yeah.
you're getting all the. I mean, it's set up for you, right? I didn't have to. I showed up, and then I didn't think of another thing until I left, right? Because
Yeah.
they were like, okay, you just do this, you do this, and so it was a really enjoyable experience. You know what?
Yeah.
The one part that I didn't like that
Other
no
than
one
having to go 4 miles to get deodorant.
that part. Yeah, it was a bad day for everybody. Um, that part, the 7 hours, but also being 4 hours time change
Oh,
from
yeah.
um, the East Coast, right? And as
Yeah.
a business owner, like that was rough. That part was
Mhm.
really, I'd wake up and I'd have 400 emails and I'd be like, oh, what's happening? That stress. I don't think I could do it. I couldn't do it. But, the nice part was by dinner time, it's like, well, everyone's leaving me alone now, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
evening was very quiet.
But
Uh,
also the sun wasn't setting until midnight and was
no,
rising at
actually,
4.
so that's actually a good point. So we were there and it was 12, 12, 12 hours of sunlight, 12 hours.
Really?
Yeah, it was like
Oh,
a
wow.
very normal day of not, that anyone would experience. So that didn't throw
Yeah.
us off
That's
really.
good.
Yeah.
It
I
threw
think
us off.
about Well, you're easily thrown off. The I mean, let's be honest, you get sick every time you travel.
That's
Uh,
true.
I like to wrap up though. I think about Alaska. I think about my trip there often.
Yeah.
I think about how peaceful it was, how incredible it is, and when I am having a chaotic, crazy ass day here in the Philly area, I think about there, and I think about the people living there, and I think about the calm, the slowness of it, and what they get to experience and see. And I'm like, it's like 10 seconds of Zen where I'm like, you know
Do you
what?
price it out? Like,
No, no, because I would rather die than spend any winter in Alaska of any part. But
yeah.
I do think, and actually flew next to a family who was from the Dallas area, but they had bought a summer vacation home up in like outside of Anchorage, which
Oh,
I thought
wow.
was like, yeah. And again, that was interesting. A lot of people, in the Philly area, we have a lot of people that snowbird down to Florida, and
Mhm.
there in Alaska, a lot of those people go to Arizona,
Yep.
which was really an interesting, like, migration shift of people, but it
Yeah.
makes sense. So,
Yeah, I don't blame them. I like to get out of Texas, in the summertime too. I spent 2 weeks back home just because I didn't wanna be here. It's so oppressively hot.
right, you can't even go outside.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would much rather be, risking the rain.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
summer, at least
Yeah.
be. Yeah, well, I kind of want to go back,
Yeah.
actually, now that yeah.
Let's
I'm gonna
go.
book let's go. I'm gonna book a cruise. You book a land tour, and then
Perfect.
we'll.
Why don't we just do we'll just do a really long we'll do the cruise that ends with the land tour.
Yep.
That's what
Yeah.
I think is the best. That's what if I'm gonna do Alaska again, that's how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the one way and then the land tour.
Because the one way also gives you more stops, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not rushing to turn back around and get
Yeah.
back down to Vancouver or Seattle.
Mhm.
So they does give you more options and more experiences throughout. And then yeah, when you end in Seward, or you can start in Seward, right, and then
Yeah.
end in. But yeah, I think that is the trip. That is the trip
Mhm.
of a lifetime. Doing both,
Mhm.
uh, which you know is easy enough to do.
As long as you got a couple weeks vacation time. That seems like a really good option, honestly, for teachers. Like, you used to be a teacher. My mom is a teacher. My mom's complaint is always that she can't ever go somewhere in the off season, right? And so she doesn't like that whenever she and I travel somewhere together, we're having to pay full price. It's super busy because if she's not working, kids aren't in school, and I
Right.
think that Alaska is one of those places where, first of all, not a lot of kids go to Alaska. I was on Disney Cruise Line and there still weren't very many children.
Certainly not a lot of young, right?
Yeah.
You might like
There were
eight and above.
teenagers.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
right as eight and above, but definitely like 12 and above. But not.
Yeah.
I honestly probably wouldn't. I wouldn't have taken my kids when they were like 2 or 3. They're not going
Yeah.
to. Right. They can't. And a lot of these excursions too. Not to cut you off, but
Yeah.
the difference here is the excursions are a lot of event. Right. Like you have to
Mhm.
be physically able to do a lot of these things,
Yeah.
and um, you know. Right, a 2 or 3 year old, 4 year old, 5-year-old can't do these extended excursions that are
Mhm.
physically demanding.
Yeah, like you're going canoeing, you're going hiking,
Right.
yeah, like you're doing things where I think that a lot of them even have like a minimum age requirement where
Yeah.
it's not a matter of if you want to, it's a matter of can you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that Alaska is a good option because my mom's got 2 months out of the summer that she does not have a single thing that she needs to worry about, which is I guess, the one positive of being a teacher. Uh, and she can like it's prime time to go to Alaska, right? So she could
Right.
easily do a cruise and a land tour, take a couple of weeks, and because she's in the Pacific Northwest, it's easy enough for her to get home when
Right.
she's done, which is great.
Yeah. On a teacher salary, though, you're gonna have to save up for
Yeah,
quite
that
some
is the other side of that.
time. Well, that's the other issue.
Yeah.
So, but listen, we think you should just go to Alaska. Don't if it's on your bucket list, do it.
Do
Don't
it.
wait. We just talked about being, some of the things being physically demanding. Do it before it's too late.
Yeah.
Get there, experience it, and all the some of the great things that this amazing country has to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. If Alaska's not on your bucket list, I honestly think it should be. Like I said at the beginning, it wasn't on mine. I'm so glad that I went. I would love to go back. Just think about it, let us know what questions you have. Obviously, Chris and I have adequate experience, right? I've cruised, he's done the land tours. Reach out to us. You can email us. You can comment on our posts on social media. You can send us a DM, like in whatever way is easiest for you to get a hold of us. By all means, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have about Alaska. But in the meantime, please subscribe, please download. Thank you so much for listening to us. We know that we're obnoxious, and that's part of why we're doing this podcast. If you're listening, Chris is making faces like like he's not obnoxious, which is really funny. Uh, but in the meantime, let's just go. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.